Hey everybody, welcome to the Cop House Podcast. I'm Doug and I'm the son.
And I'm Ron, I'm the dad.
This is a bi-weekly podcast that covers all things policing. We're a father and son combo with over 33 combined years of police experience. Our show will tackle anything and everything you could possibly think of regarding the great policing profession. Nothing is off limits.
Welcome to episode 3 of the Cop House Podcast. We are two generations, one great calling.
Yep. Make sure to follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, the Cop House Podcast, and on Instagram and Twitter at Cop House Podcast. And you can find us on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcasts.
Are we still investigating MySpace, or is that?
No, I think we
ruled that out.
Yeah, I think we ruled out MySpace.
All right. Hey, yeah. What are we talking about today?
So we're gonna keep it a little lighter today. We had a pretty information-heavy episode last time.
Oh, I didn't notice.
That was a great episode. But just to kind of have a little bit of variation here, we're going to have a little bit of a lighter one. We're going to talk about police, movies, and TV shows. Some of our favorites, some things that make some of them awful.
Yeah. Well, before we jump right into that, Doug, maybe we should tell the audience, our faithful listeners, and we do appreciate you listening. I hear, I'm sure you do too, son. Get a lot of comments, some Facebook comments, and people in person saying that they love the show. Appreciate you listening. So how we went about this was we decided on what we were not going to rate or what we were not going to evaluate. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to stick to shows and movies about municipal, county, or state police agencies. So things involving the feds are kind of out.
Yeah.
The Fugitive, that involves the U.S. Marshals. Silence of the Lambs.
Is that the old Harrison Ford movie?
It
Fugitive?
is.
Okay.
And Silence of the Lambs, that was the FBI. So I'm kind of dating myself here. So movies involving the feds, we kind of left off the table. Movies or shows involving fictional investigative agencies like Men in Black, although I like the movie Men in Black.
Oh, it's hilarious.
Wasn't a municipal, county, or state police department. It was a specialty agency investigating outer space aliens, so it didn't really count. Although we'll talk a little bit about reality shows like Cops, which all of us criminal justice dorks at MSU used to get together on Saturday night to watch Cops. Yeah, I know, that's funny. Live PD, The First 48, kind of off the table. And finally, those movies and shows where the bad guys are kind of the focal point, and the cops are just kind of on the periphery. I think of Reservoir Dogs. A lot of cops in that movie. In fact, one of the undercover gangsters was LAPD, but wasn't really a police show. So that's kind of, would you agree that's kind of what we left off the table?
Yeah, for the most part. A couple of my favorite ones, especially that last thing you mentioned where like the bad guys are kind of the focus. A couple of my favorites have that a little bit, but none of them are like super focused on the bad guys. There's some of mine that are like kind of 50-50, like it kind of bounces back and forth. But we'll talk about it.
Yeah, for sure. And, we did consider comedies like Super Troopers,
The Other Guys,
Police Academy, The Naked Gun. and honestly, this was not off the table. Animated shows like Zootopia or...
greatest cop movie of all time.
Yes, but I don't think it made it into either of our top 3.
No, it did not. So what do you want to start with? You want to start with going through each of our favorites and then kind of talk about some of the other ones that we wanted to bring up, or do you want to do the other way around? What are you thinking?
Can I give a quick shout out to a couple people who took the time to respond to a social media post we just did?
Sure.
We put it out on Facebook and Instagram about what today's show was going to be about, and we said, hey, what's your favorite? Well, I got to tell you, Peter from Instagram probably had the most interesting post or a response to the question. Peter says he really enjoys a South Korean television show called Voice. I'd never heard of it, obviously not being from South Korea. It's in its 4th season. It's like the #1 show in the nation of South Korea. The premise is it's a race against the clock to catch violent criminals using audio clues that come in through the dispatch center. That is an interesting and original premise. I mean, how many police shows here in America involve the 911 operators or the dispatch centers. And that's pretty much what the premise of this show is. So
yeah, it's an interesting thing to focus on. I mean, that stuff definitely applies. I've had cases where there's been stuff in maybe the 911 calls or, conversations people have had with the dispatchers that have played a role in cases that I've dealt with, but it's kind of an interesting focus of a show.
Yeah, and that appears to be, from the research I did, the premise of the show. So, hey, Peter, thanks a lot for listening. Thanks a lot for responding. Mike on Facebook.
Good buddy of mine.
Good buddy of yours, and I've met Mike. Mike on Facebook listed The Untouchables as his favorite movie.
Yep.
And for reasons I just named, that's primarily federal law enforcement. I'm not sure it's going to make our top 3. We'll see.
It's a good movie, though.
Very good movie. But then Mike, Doug, you're not going to like this.
I saw the comment, yeah.
Yeah, Mike, when referring to the movie End of Watch,
which is probably the most popular recent police movie.
I think it's in your top 3, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I love that movie.
It might even be towards, I don't want to ruin it. I don't want to give a spoiler here. When referring to the movie End of Watch, Mike refers to it as flaming rubbish. Doug, how do you feel about that? Flaming rubbish from your good buddy and our friend of the show, Mike.
Gonna have to respectfully disagree, but I would be. I'm gonna text him later. I'm gonna see what he says, what his reason for that is, just because I'm curious.
Yeah. Okay. So we broke this up into small screen and big screen. Small screen being, for a guy like me, the older guy, the dad of the show, those shows that appeared on network television, NBC, ABC, CBS, and then the streaming services. So that's what we're calling small screen shows. And then the big screen, that's obviously movies you go see in the theater. Should we talk just briefly about the criteria we use to evaluate our shows? Now, this wasn't a formal scientific process, but we talked about this over.
We don't have a spreadsheet.
No, we talked about this over Thanksgiving, though, when we got together. We kind of looked at our shows based on how realistic they were, how cringeworthy they were. And if for the police officers who are listening in the audience right now, I think you know what we mean when we say cringeworthy. You watch a police show and you're just like, ugh.
That would never happen.
That would never happen.
Quick side note on that.
Yeah.
My wife gets very upset with me when we watch anything police related together, because if there's something that's super cringeworthy, I'll say something and she'll go, "Shut up! It's just a show. Just watch."
Right. So realism, cringeworthiness, and then overall entertainment value. And I got to tell you, sometimes the entertainment value can override the cringeworthiness of it.
Yeah.
You might, as a police officer, you might be thinking, "Oh, that's just awful." But if it's entertaining, hey, it might bump it up a little bit.
Which the other thing we mentioned too is unrealistic doesn't necessarily mean cringeworthy.
Right.
Yeah.
Indeed. Can I give a quick example of something that's cringeworthy to me?
Yeah.
Generally speaking, I like the show Law and Order. Not all the new ones, Special Victims and
I'm talking about the original.
The original, not
Law and
the
Order.
Dog Catchers and all that other stuff that they branched off. I'm talking about the original. But occasionally that show, in my opinion, gets a little cringeworthy, especially with the witty banter that goes back and forth between the lead homicide detective and the prosecutor, and they kind of dig at each other. I'm like, that would never really happen.
Yeah.
And, I'll see you in court. I mean, just garbage like that is just so cringeworthy, I think. So that's kind of what I mean by cringeworthy.
Yeah.
So let's get to the... go ahead.
You had a butt for that, I believe.
It's entertaining.
Right, yeah.
It didn't make my top 3, but it is the entertainment value of that show. I can gut through the cringeworthiness of it.
Because it's entertaining.
Indeed.
Yeah. All right.
So, shall we get to the previews? Or to the reviews? How do you want to do this? Here in the stack, I took some notes, and I've got your top 3 for the small screen, and I've got your top 3 for the big screen. Same with me, and I have them in reverse order. I don't know if we're going to have enough time to do all 3 of them, but
let's do small screen, big screen, big screen.
Okay.
So we'll do all the small screen ones first. I don't know if you want to go first with your favorites or if you want me to.
Well, why don't you go first? You had at number 3. It's right there on the stack for the small screen.
I didn't have these in any
you
particular order.
Okay, when you texted them to me, I thought they were in order.
No, they were in no particular order.
Okay.
So my three favorite small screen ones, my three favorite cop shows would be True Detective.
Which season?
Particularly season 1. So
Okay.
True Detective is an anthology style show,
Right.
where each season is completely independent of each other. Like each season is a different cast, different time period, different.
They're standalone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Each season is basically a mini series. So particularly season 1, I've seen season 2. It's good, but doesn't hold a candle to season 1. I have not even bothered to watch season 3.
Okay.
So season 1 is Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson
Right.
are these two detectives in the deep South down in Louisiana, and it's this crazy conspiracy plot, and it's super dark, like Southern Gothic style, and it's awesome. I've watched
It is awesome.
I've watched that whole season, just season 1, probably 5 times.
And I'll tell you, True Detective season 1 also made it into my top 3 for the small screen.
Yeah.
So when it comes to, one thing I love about this podcast, the Cop House podcast, is we've got the old guy perspective, we got the young guy perspective.
Yeah. Which you actually introduced me to that.
We are in lockstep agreement on True Detective season 1.
Yeah.
I've never seen season 2 because I can't force myself to watch it because I'll always be comparing it to season 1.
It's pretty good. It's not nearly as good as season 1, but it is. It's still good. It's still very entertaining. Yeah, you actually introduced me
Right.
to True Detective. The first time I watched it was your second time watching it. We should watch it together.
Gotcha. Yep. So, in terms of our 3 criteria, entertainment value, cringeworthiness, and realism, where do you land on those 3?
I don't think it's like super realistic, but I mean it's not like crazy way off either. It shows, I think, a lot of the kind of the nuts and bolts of like the investigative work. It's a lot of them going around, driving around and talking to people to try to build this case.
Yep.
And it's just the stuff they find out about this case. It's so well written. The dialogue is super interesting. Do you have any thoughts on the realistic side of that?
There's parts of it that are just they're entertaining.
Yeah.
I won't even say it's cringeworthy, but completely unrealistic.
But it doesn't. But it's somehow at the same time not cringeworthy.
No, it's not, and I don't know how they pull that off. Just as an example, Detective Rust Cole.
Okay.
Matthew McConaughey.
Yep.
He plays this burnt out, formerly substance addicted police homicide detective, and in order to catch the bad guy, he goes undercover and he's doing drugs with this motorcycle gang.
Yeah.
And he helps them pull off this armed robbery, and I mean let's be honest, it's a little unrealistic.
Yeah, in that you'd be hard pressed to find a detective that would do it. I think the reason it doesn't cross into cringeworthy though is because they don't depict it like, oh yeah, this is what detectives do. It's like, no, this is this one absolutely off the rails character, what he's doing. They don't try to portray it like, hey, this is how detective work is.
Right.
You do drugs with motorcycle gangs.
Right.
And pull off armed robbery. They don't try to pass it off as, hey, this is what all detectives do.
Right.
And I think that's why I think they keep it out of the cringeworthy realm.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great point.
I think.
And Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey, they are just incredible together.
We can't say enough good things about season 1 of True Detective.
Right.
If you haven't seen it, watch it.
Watch it.
I think it's on HBO.
Can I confess something here? As long as our audience doesn't share this, and well, I don't care if they share it. I'm just kidding. When True Detective season 1 came out, I was actually working as a detective, detective sergeant for my former agency, and the character Detective Rust Cole in the show. Do you remember what they called him? The nickname that some people had for him, they called him the tax man.
Oh yeah,
because he carried a ledger around with him, and he carried this big ledger with him, and he would write all of his case notes in this huge ledger that he carried around with him.
And these big like elaborate sketches.
Right. I went out and bought a ledger.
Oh, you nerd.
I know. Isn't that ridiculous? And I wanted the guys to call me tax man.
I have one too that I use for my fire investigation stuff.
Right. Yeah. I tried to become Rust Cole. Ridiculous.
Minus the doing drugs with the motorcycle
minus
gangs.
That part, of course, yes.
But anyways, so True Detective season 1, I mean, the realism rating, I mean, we're not putting numbers on it, but it's their investigative work, pretty realistic. Some of the more dramatic stuff is very unrealistic, but they don't try to portray it as like, this is what detectives do. So it really doesn't cross into that cringeworthy. I don't think there's any cringeworthy. There's not really many cringeworthy parts to it.
No, I would agree.
And it is probably easily the most entertaining piece of police media that I've ever seen.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think it's even close.
So here we are. You've named one of yours from the small screen.
Yep.
And it depicts the Louisiana State Police.
Yeah. Yep.
These two detectives.
Yep.
So let me do one of mine.
Okay.
From the small screen.
Which that took one of your small screen ones, right? Because that was one of your favorites as well.
Yes, it did.
Okay.
Yeah. True Detective Season 1 was my number 2.
Okay.
So let me do my number 3.
Okay.
So I'll kind of save my number 1 for the end. But I'm the old guy. So my number 3, we have to go out to the West Coast, to the LAPD. And it was a show that was on NBC from 1968 to 1975. And it depicts a seasoned police officer for LAPD, Officer Pete Malloy, and his young trainee, who is in what we now call nowadays FTO, Field Training Officer role, Officer Jim Reed. And the show's Adam 12. Doug, it's a fantastic show. I don't know how much of it you've ever watched.
I've seen like bits of it when I was a kid. I think you know, whatever station we had that played the old shows, I think it would play it, and I would probably watch it with you. I don't really remember it too much because it's probably been since I was a kid since I've watched it with you, but I have seen it. Yeah.
What I like about this show, I love the back and forth between Officer Pete Malloy and Officer Jim Reed. Pete Malloy plays your stereotypical, very realistic. He does it very well. He plays the seasoned, cynical street cop, and he does it very well. Jim Reed plays the freshly scrubbed, bright-eyed, idealistic police officer right out of the academy. And the two of them do that. They pull that off so well. Now, I think the reason this show is done so well is because there were LAPD advisors on the show. In fact, often, if you've ever watched this show, you'll hear the dispatcher say, 1 Adam 12, 1 Adam 12. Well, that's actually realistic. The number 1 in 1 Adam 12, the number 1 indicated that they worked the Central Division for LA, downtown, or the near Hollywood, but more the downtown. So that's what the 1 meant. Adam meant that they were a 2-man unit, and 12 was their car number. So 1 Adam 12. I mean, that's realistic stuff there. And they did have police advisors for LAPD on the show. Another thing I like about the show, Doug, is it depicts them going on the most mundane, boring calls, which that is patrol work. If you haven't listened to episode 1 of the Cop House podcast, go back and give a listen. Doug and I, we spent time talking about patrol, the uniformed police officer going on the most mundane calls. Sure, they go on a lot of armed robberies, but they're also going out on the nonviolent family troubles. They're going out on the missing kid or the runaway kid or the neighbor complaint.
They're not getting in shootouts on every call.
No.
Yeah.
In fact, there might be entire episodes where there's no gun violence involved. And I think that's great. So realistically, they nailed it. Entertainment value, nailed it. Cringeworthiness, occasionally. You know, Doug, how do you feel every time you see a TV cop or a movie cop arrest somebody and immediately read him his Miranda rights?
That can be a little cringeworthy.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also funny too because I've arrested people who have insisted that I have to read them to them. I'm like, that's not how that works.
Because I saw it on TV.
Yeah, right.
Right. So, Adam 12, that was my number 3.
I know we're trying to get all these in the amount of time that we've allotted for ourselves here, but just a quick thing about that. How much of for that show specifically, some of the cringeworthy stuff do you think comes from like the time period? Because it's an older show, so stuff that like maybe as a cop now you might be like, oh, that would never happen. How much of that maybe would have happened in like the late 60s, early 70s?
That's a great point. The show started in 1968. the case involving Miranda v. Arizona, where we get the Miranda rights, the right to an attorney, the right to remain silent, those Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights out of the Constitution. Though that case would have come out in the mid to late 60s, that Miranda Supreme Court case. Would they have immediately read it upon arresting a suspect? I don't know. I'm not that old.
Okay. Well, all right. So we going back to me?
Sure. Yeah.
All right.
I don't know. I don't know if you want to jump to your number one or if we want to just keep plugging away.
Well, my number one was True Detective.
Oh,
I started with number one.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So I'm going top down here. My number two is going to be Southland, which is actually another LAPD show. That one's very LAPD focused. It's been a while since I've watched it. Like I couldn't really give you. Oh, you have right here in the stack. You have some of the.
Yeah, I got some of the stats here.
Yeah, you got. And I think, in hindsight, I think Southland actually takes a lot of influence probably from Adam 12.
Really?
Because you have the FTO, which is Officer John Cooper,
field training officer.
Yep. And then you have his trainee, which is Officer Ben Sherman, and it's kind of the same thing. The FTO, the older guy, he's kind of the hardened, street cop, and then you have the bright-eyed new guy right out of the academy, and it's just kind of their adventures being LAPD cops. And the cool thing about that show too, it looks like in the little synopsis here that you typed up, it just talks about them, but there's a lot more characters than just them.
Right.
Southland bounces around with different like sets of characters almost, and sometimes they overlap, but most often not. So like you have John Cooper and Ben Sherman, they're the FTO and new guy, but then you also have some detectives that are partnered, and they'll be working cases, and just some other characters that are, kind of ancillary to that. And there's just different sets of characters that almost star, and it bounces back and forth between them. Sometimes there's overlap. Like sometimes you'll have an episode that's more focused on what the detective partners are doing, but sometimes it overlaps. Like they'll come out to a scene that maybe John Cooper and Ben Sherman have gotten the initial call to. So there's a little bit of overlap. It's You've never watched Southland, have you?
I never have, no.
You should.
And this was
Very
on
good.
from 2009 to 2013, started on NBC, and then TNT picked it up in its second through fifth seasons.
It's phenomenal.
Okay,
good. Realism. It's been a while since I watched it, so I don't want to say anything that's untrue about it, but I have definitely watched it since being involved in police work, and I don't remember anything specifically that I was like, oh, that would never happen.
Okay.
I mean, I'm sure there was some stuff, but it was pretty right on, like you said, and I do think it probably drew a lot from Adam 12.
Okay.
It does show a lot of them going to
mundane,
some of the more mundane calls. I just lost track of the category. Dude, realism, cringeworthy. Yeah.
And entertainment value.
Yeah. So the cringeworthiness. Sometimes it got a little cringeworthy when they started going off and they would have segments where they'd be talking about some of the characters' personal lives. Sometimes it got a little cringeworthy.
Okay.
I think it was mostly because didn't really care about it as much. It's like, oh no, let me see the case they're working on. But entertainment value, I mean, it's another phenomenal show. It's great.
Cool.
Highly recommend it. You should watch it.
I should.
I don't know where you find it nowadays, but I'm sure you can find it somewhere.
Somewhere, yeah. Okay, so my number one, we've covered my number 3, Adam 12. My number 2 was True Detective Season 1, which you and I agreed on. But it was number 1 for you. My number 1, again, I'm the old guy, I'm the dad, is Barney Miller. This show was on for 8 seasons, from 1975 to 1982 on ABC. It depicts the New York Police Department. So, you and I, with our shows here, we spend a lot of time out on the West Coast, LAPD. This is NYPD. This is the 12th Precinct, which is set in Greenwich Village. And it depicts the Detective Bureau, the 12th Precinct Detective Bureau. Barney Miller plays the captain in charge of, I never quite picked up if he was in charge of the whole precinct or if he was just in charge of the Detective Bureau.
Because the show pretty much just focuses on the Detective Bureau, right?
It does.
Okay.
It does. Yep. Occasionally, you'll see a uniformed officer, a patrol officer, come into the Detective Bureau, which is up like on the 5th floor of this fictional 12th precinct station. Entertainment value. It's funny.
It is more of a comedy, isn't it?
It's totally a sitcom.
Okay.
It was a
all right.
half-hour sitcom. And but the cast of characters they bring through, a lot of famous people got their start on Barney Miller.
Okay.
And they'd come in as like some drunk or some a homeless person or some armed robbery suspect, and they got their start on Barney Miller, and they went on to be famous. Right now I can't think of anyone, but I know they did. Take my word for it.
Yeah. Google it.
That's right.
Or tweet us.
Realistic. Okay, here's where I'll talk about where it was very realistic, and I'll talk about where the realism kind of broke down and almost went into cringeworthiness.
Quick, just context thing here. I have seen Barney Miller. I know I've watched it with you before. It's been a while. Correct me if I'm wrong. That show pretty much entirely takes place in their detective's office, correct?
That's right. Yes.
Okay.
You very rarely see them outside of the office.
Okay.
Now in this office, their set, you have all the detectives with all their individual desks, no cubicles. They're just working in these open air desks. There's a lockup right there within just a couple feet of one of the desks. I don't know how realistic that is. And then the captain, the boss, Barney Miller, he has his own office, and then there's a couple restrooms that you never see. So that's the set. And that's almost, I would say 95% of the show takes place on that set.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, and I think that's just kind of that sitcom format too.
Right.
So
Yep. So let me tell you where the realism is good. The realism is good in that it depicts these guys hanging around, being cops, making fun of each other, talking trash to each other, telling jokes. I mean, watching this show makes me think of my old days in the squad room or the duty room of the Wixom Police Station.
yeah,
I mean, it's good.
it's funny.
Hal Linden plays Barney Miller. Abe Vigoda, some of you who might not know who Abe is, he was recently in a Snickers commercial where, never mind. Abe Vigoda, he's an old-time actor. He was in The Godfather. Godfather.
Okay.
He plays one of the old salty detectives. But realistically, this is what cops do. They sit around, they work on their reports, they make fun of each other, they talk trash to each other. It was incredibly realistic. Let me tell you where the realism breaks down and almost goes into cringeworthiness.
But not quite.
Not quite.
Okay. All right.
I'll let it slide because of the entertainment value. The dispatch center would call the detective bureau there where they were working to give them a call for service. So the phone would ring. One of the detectives would pick it up. Detective Harris, 12th Precinct. And you'd see him writing on a piece of paper. Got it. He'd hang up the phone and he'd go, yeah, we got an armed robbery at 123 Main Street. And Barney would say, Harris, you and Wojo, take it. And off they'd throw on their trench coats and off they'd go. Almost as though they were the first responding officers to this armed robbery. And you never see patrol.
But you never see the scenes either.
You never see the scenes. But then the detectives always come back with the guy in custody.
Huh. Okay.
So, I've never worked for a big department like you have, Doug. I've never worked for a larger agency. I've certainly never worked or even seen NYPD, the New York City Police Department, in action.
Particularly in the 80s.
Right. Yeah, in the 70s and 80s. But I'm having a hard time believing that detectives respond as first responders to an armed robbery, and I'm really having a hard time believing that they bring the suspect back and book him and take his fingerprints and his mugshot and do the interview. I think the realism breaks down a little bit there, but it's so entertaining. It's my number one.
Yeah, like I said, it's been a while since I've seen it, but I do remember it being quite funny.
Yeah, awesome. And it has perhaps the greatest intro ever for any show. If we weren't going to be violating any copyright stuff, I thought about playing it for you. But
Yeah.
if you're familiar with Barney Miller, you're probably humming it in your head right now. It's that opening bass line.
Yeah.
I could hum it, but I won't. So
You can look it up on YouTube. I probably will after this just because it's been a while. So,
right. Okay.
So moving on, I know we kind of went in opposite. You went third to first. I went first to third. So my third favorite for small screen is going to be Fargo. Particularly the first season. Fargo, much like True Detective, is an anthology style show where every season is like a mini series. It's completely self-contained. Each season, I think it does have more recurring characters than True Detective does.
Okay.
But each season is pretty much its own. You could watch any given season, and it would be pretty much independent. You'd get the gist of it. Minus some maybe side plot things with the characters' personal lives.
So we're not talking about the movie Fargo.
Right.
Which came out first?
The movie. The movie came out in the 90s.
Okay.
I don't know the year, but it's based on it.
Okay.
It is based on it.
And Fargo, the TV series, looking at my notes here, was 2014 to present.
Yeah.
So they kind of sporadically crank these seasons out on FX.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, they're not like super consistent. They'll have a season and there'll be like 3 years without one.
Yes,
and then,
that's what I saw in my research.
Yeah, so I've only ever actually seen the first season.
Okay. But you loved it.
I did.
Yeah.
I loved it a lot. It is based loosely on the movie Fargo, the Coen Brothers movie from the 90s.
Okay.
Which I don't know if I've ever actually seen the movie.
I've seen bits and pieces of the movie. I've never watched it straight through.
I know there's some characters from the movie that make it into the show, but I don't even think it's the same actors though.
Well, I think Billy Bob Thornton was in the movie as well as the show. I could be mistaken.
I know he's in the show. I truly do not know about the movie.
Okay.
Anyways, the show, loosely based on the movie of the same name, you have some real small town cops in Minnesota and North Dakota. Your notes, I see it says Missouri, but I'm guessing that's a later season because I actually rewatched the first season fairly recently. I don't think there's any Missouri angle to it, but you have this, and this is what we were talking about kind of towards the beginning, where some of my picks were not focused on the bad guys, but they definitely were a large part of it, and it was almost equal parts like following the bad guys and the cops. So you have Billy Bob Thornton, who is like, I guess you'd call him like a hitman for some crime syndicate, some organized crime organization out of Fargo, North Dakota, and his adventures in crime take him to Minnesota, and he ends up basically being investigated by some real small town police department in Minnesota there.
Okay.
And it's got kind of like a real screwy all over the place plot, kind of like True Detective does. There's a lot of conspiracy stuff going on, and it's very entertaining.
Okay.
How
about realism, cringeworthiness? It sounds like it sounds like you were entertained.
Oh, very much.
So that's good.
Yeah.
How about the other two categories?
Realism. I would say from the police side, it's not super unrealistic. It's a lot of showing kind of their investigative legwork and them trying to piece things together from different interviews. And I know at one point the what is the main cop's name?
I don't know.
Deputy Solverson.
Okay.
She's the main cop in Bemidji, Minnesota, and she basically is the only one who's catching on to this whole big crime conspiracy with the organized crime angle, and like kind of nobody believes her that she's onto it, and she's basically trying to figure it out by herself, which that I guess is kind of unrealistic. It definitely depicts her entire department as being complete useless idiots except for her. She's got this board with like yarn all over it and pictures of people, and she's she's trying to figure this out, and she's onto it, but like, and you, the audience, you know she's onto it because you're also getting the angle from the bad guys.
Right.
But Nobody in her department believes her.
Or a larger agency, because she works for, didn't you say a small
Bemidji,
municipal?
Minnesota, which
Okay.
I don't know if that's a real town or not.
I don't either,
actually
but
don't.
I'm guessing it's not a major metropolis in the show. So
Her department's like 5 people.
going back to episode 2 that we just did on the I-96 shooter, is it realistic to think that one lone police officer in a tiny police department is going to be taking down this large cartel-like
In another
organized crime
state.
syndicate in another state
Yeah.
without any help from the Minnesota State Police, the North Dakota Highway Patrol, the FBI? Probably not. So realistically, pretty low in that category, maybe?
Yeah, I would say some of the circumstances cross into unrealistic, but what I don't think is super unrealistic is her like police work.
Okay.
Like her legwork and her investigation. I don't think that's way off the mark, but some of the circumstances surrounding it, like you said, pretty unrealistic. Her actual investigative work and like her day to day, I don't think it was way off.
Okay.
Cringeworthy, I can't think of anything cringeworthy from it.
Okay. Cool.
Mostly because like her day to day stuff wasn't unrealistic. You know, some of the circumstances were unrealistic, but the individual actions of the characters aren't super unrealistic. At least from the police side. I've never been a hitman for an organized crime syndicate
That I'm aware of.
Right. Yeah.
And I've known you for a little while.
Yeah, just a while. So,
right.
I don't know how realistic that guy, Billy Bob Thornton's actions are.
Okay.
But it's very entertaining. It's this whole conspiracy and everything and how she's like trying to figure it out. It's very entertaining. I wish I could give a little more insight into how it relates to the movie of the same name, but I have never seen it.
Okay.
But yeah, I've never seen any of the other seasons. That's just season 1. I believe there's some recurring characters, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
Great show though.
Excellent.
Season
You
1.
You ready to head over to the big screen?
Let's do it.
All right. I'm going to, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip my number 3
Okay.
and I'm going to go right to my number 2. You and I talked about this as we were kind of prepping for this show, and I think we were in disagreement as to whether or not this was a police show. But because I'm the co-producer of the show,
I think you thought we were in disagreement. You said something about it like I disagreed with you, and I don't think I did.
oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't
Maybe
think
I
I
was
did.
just trying to pick a fight.
Yeah, that could
It's
be.
very possible. Sure. Okay. My number 2.
You always fighting.
My number 2 is Tombstone, released in 1993. Now, some of you right now just went, I heard an audible gasp from the audience, and they said, Ron, that is a Western. That is not a police show. To which I will quote Doc Holliday and say, I beg to differ, sir. I beg to differ, sir. Tombstone has a city police officer in it, the town marshal.
Yep.
It has a county sheriff in it, and it also has a U.S. Marshal. Now, I know I'm kind of breaking one of our rules at the beginning that said we were not going to do movies about the feds, but
There are rules. You can do what you want.
there are rules. We can break them. But this movie, although it is a Western, has a county sheriff in it and a town marshal, which is the modern-day equivalent
Yeah.
of a city cop.
I think you made me watch this movie with you when I was about 5.
Did I?
Probably.
Did it scar you?
No, great
Okay,
movie.
good.
Great movie.
Oh, great movie.
Doesn't make it into my top few police movies,
All
but
right.
it is in my top few favorite overall movies.
All right. Well, I even have here in my notes, I'm not sure this is a police movie per se, but I'm going to go with it. Kurt Russell, Val Kilmer, Sam Elliott, Bill Paxton. Oh my goodness. 4 powerhouse actors. Kurt Russell plays Wyatt Earp. Val Kilmer plays Doc Holliday. Holy cats.
Real life people too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. And this involves Kurt Russell coming to town with his 2 brothers, the Earp brothers. Kurt Russell, Sam Elliott, Bill Paxton. They're the 3 Earp boys.
Yeah.
They come to town. Kurt Russell's a retired or a former U.S. deputy marshal.
Mm-hmm.
He comes to town. All he wants to do is gamble, open up a saloon, and make money. While these bad guys, called the Cowboys,
Yep.
these bad guys are destroying this town. They end up killing
Tombstone, Arizona.
Arizona.
Yep.
They end up killing the town
Very
marshal.
cosmopolitan.
Very cosmopolitan.
Sorry.
They end up killing the town marshal or the city cop. They end up terrorizing the women and children. Finally, Kurt Russell and Sam Elliott and Bill Paxton, they can't take it anymore. So they get sworn in as the town marshal. Val Kilmer plays kind of this friend of the Earp boys, but he's on the fringe of also being kind of a bad guy himself.
Yeah.
Some of the greatest lines in movie cinema history. I'm your Huckleberry. I mean, just good stuff. Good movie.
You're a daisy if you do.
Let's talk about realism. Was it realistic back in the 1800s? I would say probably. That was probably Western criminal justice back in the 1800s.
And part of the realism, too, is most of the characters in the show and most of the events in the show actually happened.
Yes, the shootout at the OK Corral.
Yeah.
That actually took place.
Yes.
And back in the 1800s, you could kill a bad guy with impunity. I mean, it just...
Yeah.
So...
Yeah.
Is it realistic by 2023 standards? No, but it's not a 2023 movie. It's a movie from the 1800s.
It's set in the 1800s.
Entertainment value? Wow. It's so entertaining, so funny. I mean, there's just funny parts to it. Cringeworthiness? I can't think of anything.
No.
Great movie. So that's...
No, it is a great movie. I think on the realism side, though, I think I read into it one time. There's a couple things that they did kind of skip on that actually happened. I believe there was another Earp brother that they just skipped altogether. And I don't know why they did that. Maybe just for time or didn't play as big of a role. But there's definitely some historical parts that aren't realistic by the standards of what actually happened. Right. But, I mean, great movie.
Great movie. So that's my number 2 for the big screen. Doug, big screen. What do you got?
I'm trying to see. Which one? Did you cut off your...
I cut off my number 3, just in the interest of time.
All right, let me see here. Do you have, you know what one I think I'm going to cut off because I think it's on yours too. Do you have LA Confidential on yours?
I do.
All right, so I'll cut LA Confidential off of my top 3 because you're going to talk about it anyways.
We'll both talk about it because it made both of our lists.
Okay, so LA Confidential did make my list, but we'll come back to that because I'll cut that off mine because we both had it.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have a particular order for these, so I'll just pick one. End of Watch. It's probably the most. That's got to be the most popular police movie of probably the last 15 years, if I had to guess.
Facebook Mike called it flaming rubbish.
Yeah.
Defend it, Doug.
My good buddy.
Yes. I'm going to call him Facebook Mike from this point forward.
Sure.
He called it flaming rubbish. You got to defend it. Go.
I just think it's a good movie. I don't really have a defense because I don't know why he thinks it's flaming rubbish. I'll hit him up later.
Right.
But it's another LAPD. Not show. This one's a movie, but it's right. About LAPD, and you got 2 cops who are partners. You got Jake Gyllenhaal as Officer Brian Taylor and Michael Pena as Officer Mike Zavala, and they're partners, and it's kind of their adventures with the LAPD at first, but then they end up kind of stumbling into this bigger case that has to do with like Mexican cartels, and it ends up getting them into some serious problems because the cartels now have it out for these 2 guys specifically. Realism, I think it hits a lot of the same points as like Southland and Adam 12, where it shows them, they have the big crazy shootout calls, but they also go to like noise complaints and stuff like that. So, I mean, the day-to-day police work, I mean, it's a movie. They definitely have stuff that's more dramatic. I know there's one part where they get into it with this guy and he's talking a bunch of trash to them, and he's like, "Oh, take your belt and badge off and fight me like a man," and he does it, which that is
cringe.
Not realistic, and it's pretty cringeworthy. Cringy. But that's the only thing that jumps to mind that's like super cringeworthy about that movie.
In the 6 years you've been a cop, Doug, how many times have you had a prisoner tell you, if you didn't have that badge on, blah blah blah?
A bunch of times. However, what I've never done is taken it off and bare knuckle boxed them.
Right. Yeah.
So.
And I did a 27-year career in policing, and multiple times. If you didn't have that badge on, and I policed back in the 90s when maybe I could have gotten away with it. I don't know, but I never took the badge off, and went 15 rounds with the guy in the booking area of the police station.
Right. So I mean, that part unrealistic. little cringeworthy. Entertainment value for the movie is great. I'm not going to give any spoilers, but they end up seriously crossed with this cartel who has it out for them because of, just doing good patrol work. They stumbled into some pretty major cases involving, drugs and human trafficking and stuff like that. And they find themselves crossed with this cartel. And I'm not going to give any spoilers on it. I know Mike thinks it's awful.
Flaming rubbish.
Facebook to be exact.
Right.
But it's I think it's a great movie.
Okay.
It's very, very entertaining. I don't think the realism is way off, at least in terms of the patrol. So in terms of their patrol work, I don't think that the realism is way off. In terms of this whole finding themselves crossed with the cartel and stuff like that, I've never worked anywhere down on the southern border. I don't know how any of that works. They might put out hits on cops who cause them problems.
Okay.
I don't know. But I do think it's a very entertaining movie. That came out in 2012?
2012, 11 years ago.
That's probably the most well-known cop movie of the last 15 years. I think I had already seen it when I went through the academy, but I think our academy instructors actually told us to watch it.
Okay.
So
you tried to convince me to watch it as homework in preparation for this episode.
And you didn't.
And I didn't. No.
Are you going to at some point?
No, I probably will. I probably will.
I believe also, last thing on End of Watch.
Yeah.
Just because you mentioned it for Adam 12, I don't quote me, but I believe I remember reading somewhere that they also had LAPD advisors for that show.
You heard it, folks. Doug swears that they had LAPD
No,
advisors.
don't quote me.
I just quoted you.
I think so. And I believe they also had the two leads. I think they had them ride with actual LAPD cops on ride-alongs for a good amount of time before they filmed it. Again, I could be wrong, could be thinking of something completely different, but I thought I remember reading that.
One thing, and
should have looked it up. But
you and I, both small screen and big screen, we have several LAPD shows on both of our lists.
Yeah.
For big and small screen. LAPD has, it's had its fair share of scandals over the years, much like all large police departments. But the LAPD does a really good job of managing its image. And this could be an episode in and of itself. Public information, image management.
Yeah.
But the LAPD, the bosses, they do not seem to like it when their department is misrepresented, because going as far back as Dragnet and Adam 12, I mean, these shows about the LAPD would have advisors on the show.
Yeah.
And this appears to still be continuing with this End of Watch that you just mentioned.
Yeah, there's no way that's not intentional.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, let's do my number one, and I think it's your number two, maybe, for the big screen.
I didn't have mine ranked. Okay. I really didn't have mine ranked.
All right.
Mine are in no particular order.
You and I both agree that L.A. Confidential is in our top three.
Oh, we could talk about this movie probably just by itself for an hour and a half.
Indeed. And it's my number one. L.A. Confidential came out in 1997.
It might be my number one too, actually.
Let's just say it is.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll quote you on that. L.A. Confidential came out in 1997. It is based on a book by James Ellroy. If it fell into a category, it would be called neo-noir. Neo meaning new, noir meaning that dark, that dark type of movie where there's usually a femme fatale, usually a woman who needs to be rescued from the heroic male. The noir movies were very popular in the 40s and 50s. Mm-hmm. Well,
it's set in the 50s, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
So this is neo-noir, new noir. That and Kim Basinger. I don't know. Basinger?
I don't know.
Kim, she plays the femme fatale, and so this is neo-noir. What's interesting, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this was written, it's based on a book by James Ellroy.
Have you read the book?
I have not.
Okay.
But James Ellroy has written extensively on a 1947 unsolved murder that has been referred to in the public as the Black Dahlia.
Okay.
Are you familiar with that?
A little bit.
There was a Hollywood starlet who came out from the Midwest somewhere, and she ended up being murdered in L.A., like in Hollywood, like within view of the Hollywood Hills, and her severed body was found near a sidewalk of a new subdivision that was under construction. It was never solved. And her name was Elizabeth Short, but she was referred to as the Black Dahlia, which dahlia is a flower that means sadness or betrayal. So this James Ellroy wrote extensively about the Black Dahlia, Elizabeth Short, and this unsolved murder. Well, he also wrote the book L.A. Confidential, in which this movie, also set in L.A., was based on.
Kind of a side note, but it's just funny how little things like that can kind of permeate, culture and media. And the only reason I say that is because there's a deathcore metal band called the Black Dahlia Murder.
Okay, well,
that I'm sure you've never listened to, but I have.
Yeah, no, I don't think I have their latest album.
No, so. The only reason I bring that up though is because it's kind of interesting how things like that can kind of permeate media and culture and be kind of shown in different ways.
Right.
So
yeah. Okay. What do you like about this movie? It's 1997.
You could watch this movie so many times over and over again, and you will notice different things that you missed every single time.
Okay.
I've seen this movie probably a half dozen times. And I mean, it seems like every time I watch it, you pick up on different things. The plot is so intricate. There's so many different parts to it and different characters that have different roles and they have different things going on. They have different crossovers and then they all end up incorporated into this same case. It's so well written and just intricate. It would be the best way I'd describe it.
Big names in this movie. Russell Crowe, Kevin Spacey, Kim Basinger.
I don't know.
Danny DeVito.
Yep.
And again,
James Cromwell.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't want to give any spoilers, much like you didn't want to with End of Watch, but this movie is about heroin, the sale of heroin, and it's about murder.
Yep.
And it's about crooked cops and good cops and a cop who has political and aspirations to be, a next city council member and maybe the chief of police, and a cop who maybe isn't the smartest guy in the world, but he works hard. And you're right, Doug. It has an intricate plot.
So many of the characters are like different cop stereotypes too, which is it's just super interesting.
Realistic. Now, you and I have never been police officers in LAPD. Again, this is another LAPD movie,
and also not in the 1950s.
Yes, I was getting to that. I'm closer than you are, but yeah, still me, never the 1950s and never in LAPD. I wonder how realistic this movie is.
I don't know. That's something that I probably can't even speak to, because I know, with a lot of the issues in it with corruption and the different things that the different characters have going on, maybe less than upstanding things that the characters are up to. We don't know what LAPD was like in the 1950s.
Right.
I mean,
right. Well, there was a scene where two of the cops who started out as mortal enemies and then they ended up working together to catch bad guys towards the end. Well, they get into a fight in this detective interview or conference room, and in the midst of the fight, one of them ends up throwing a chair through a window, and they never get in trouble for that. A boss never comes in to break up the fight.
Yeah.
I mean, there's for the sake of drama and entertainment value, there's probably things that are not realistic.
Even for the 50s, yeah.
Even for the 50s, right.
Yeah.
That's right. Cringeworthiness? I can't think of anything.
I'm going to disagree. I think some of the scenes where Kim Basinger, I'm going to say Basinger, where she's being all seductive and trying to get the one guy into bed with her and stuff like that, it's a little cringy, I think.
Agreed.
But that doesn't have anything to do with the police work, though. So
that's right.
Just as like a movie trope of she's like barely dressed and he walks in and she's like, "Oh, I'm just lonely here." That's a little cringeworthy, but.
And again, it's a neo-noir movie, and the old noir movies always had a female who needed to be rescued by somebody.
Yeah, and you
you
can excuse the cringeworthiness because it is a trope of the genre.
Right.
So
right.
yeah, it's excusable cringeworthiness.
Realistic. You know, you and I can't speak real intelligently about it. There's probably some things that are not. Cringeworthiness, yeah, I'll give you that. Entertainment value, wow. Probably one of my favorite movies of any category.
That is probably, I would have to agree. Yeah, it's in my top 3 movies of all time, and I'm going to go ahead and say it is probably my favorite police movie too.
We agree.
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
All right.
It's in my top 2 or 3 of all time.
Awesome.
Any category. So it's definitely a movie that it has a lot of rewatchability.
Okay.
It's not a word. I made it up, coined it here, but you can rewatch that movie a lot.
I'll quote you on that.
Okay, you're quoting me on a lot of things today.
You're very quote worthy.
It's a long movie though. Isn't that movie? Movie's almost 3 hours long, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah.
But it's great.
In the time we have left, Doug, I have a very important question for you.
What you got?
Name a movie, if you can, that you loved before being a cop, that now, having been a policeman for 6 years and change, that you now can't stand. Do you have one? Do you have one?
I can't think of a movie
or a show.
Well, as far as show, I can't think of a movie. As far as a show, and I know it's kind of breaking one of our rules to even mention it, but like Criminal Minds.
Okay.
When I was in high school, I loved Criminal Minds, and now I can't even watch it.
Yeah.
Why? It's very, very cringeworthy.
Okay.
I mean, and I know we're breaking one of our rules because that movie is about FBI agents. But I mean, nothing in that show. I've never worked for the FBI, but I've worked in Detroit. I worked adjacent to some FBI people for a little bit, not super extensively or anything like that. But I don't think anything in that show would hardly ever happen ever. It's pretty entertaining, but it's very cringeworthy and very unrealistic, and I have no interest in watching it anymore.
I wonder if that show is the reason why when I would encounter a young person who's interested in criminal justice and I would say to him, hey, what do you want to do with your criminal justice degree? They would say, I want to be a
FBI agent profiler.
Yes, because that's what they do. They run around in sexy clothes and they solve interesting cases.
Yeah, and they kick doors with no search warrants.
That's right.
The most realistic thing about that show, I think, is the fact that FBI agents will go out to scenes wearing jeans, a dress shirt, and a vest that's meant to go under a shirt over their dress shirt. They do that, and they look goofy.
So mine, here's mine, because I'm the dad, I'm the old guy. Mine is Lethal Weapon with Mel Gibson and Danny Glover. Loved the show as a kid, loved the show in college. It's not a show, it's a movie. Loved it in college. Might have even loved it when I first became a police officer. And the longer I was a cop, and when I would watch it and I would see them just kill bad guys with impunity and then never sit down at a computer and type a police report, drove me insane and still drives me insane. I cannot watch the movie today. Lethal Weapon.
Yeah.
Awful.
Did you have any more movies you wanted to touch on?
I do not. We covered my list.
Okay. I had one more, but I mean, for time, we could probably forego it unless you want to talk about it.
That's all right. Whatever you want.
It's The Departed. Have you ever seen that one?
I have seen it. It's a pretty good movie. It's typical Martin Scorsese. You need a Excel spreadsheet to follow it. It's so complicated.
Yeah.
Who's the guy who did Reservoir Dogs? Everything he does in reverse.
That's not Tarantino, is it?
Yeah, Tarantino.
Oh, okay.
Scorsese and Tarantino. Complicated movies, but go ahead.
We'll be quick on The Departed just because I think pretty much everybody in the United States has probably seen that movie. The Departed has Leonardo DiCaprio, Matt Damon, Jack Nicholson. It's got a lot of big names in it, Mark Wahlberg. But it's another one that's like a real big conspiracy, hard to follow plot, very intricate, where you got one cop who's secretly working for the crime boss, and then another guy who's undercover. He is a cop, but he's undercover with the crime boss, and they're both trying to figure out who each other are. Very entertaining. As far as realism, I don't even know if it really I don't even know if I can rank it on the realism side because it's such a like specific set of circumstances that like given that set of circumstances, I don't know what a police department would do.
Right.
Like
it involves the Massachusetts State Police, as well as the FBI.
Yeah.
And we don't want to spoil it for anyone, but there is an undercover FBI agent involved in it, or not an agent, a snitch.
Yeah.
For the FBI.
Yeah.
But the Massachusetts State Police is heavily involved in this show.
Yeah, there's a guy who's associated with the crime boss, and he ends up becoming a cop for purposes of helping the crime boss. But then they have a cop who goes undercover with the crime boss,
right?
And the cops know that there's a bad guy who's in with the cops, and the bad guy knows there's a cop who's in with them, and they're both trying to like figure out who each other are.
Yeah,
that's such a weird like specific set of circumstances. As far as realism, I don't know.
Probably not.
Probably no.
There's a scene where one of the guys is tipping off the cops, and he's texting in his pocket without even being able to see the screen, and I'm just like, oh, come on, I don't know. Yeah,
it's
entertaining.
Realistic, probably not at all.
Right.
Cringeworthy, also not at all though. And entertainment, I mean, that's great movie, awesome movie, very entertaining.
It's definitely entertaining.
It's in my top 3. I would say it's probably 3 though. It's probably, if I had to put them in order, it's definitely under LA Confidential, probably under End of Watch. Great movie though.
Okay. Hey, can we do a quick summary here?
Sure. Do you want to touch real quick on some of the reality stuff just briefly? Cops and Live PD, stuff like that?
Go ahead. The only one I've ever watched is Cops.
Okay.
And you know, I'm kind of ashamed to say this, but when I was a young criminal justice student at Michigan State University, a bunch of us criminal justice students would get together on Saturday night, and we would sit around and watch Cops. And
Cops is like, I don't know. I loved watching it when I wanted to be a cop, but before I became one, and then I became a cop, and I'm like, I do this at work. Like, why do I want to go home and watch this?
Right.
I mean, it's real. Like, it's actual camera crews that go with cops. So, I mean, as far as realism, I'd say, it's been on for so long that as far as the realism, you have to almost consider like which season you're watching, like what time period it is. Because obviously things change through time in police work. But
sure, procedures.
The most unrealistic part about it is they don't then show the cops typing reports after.
Right, and they don't show them driving around for hours and hours doing nothing.
They show the action, and it's like, okay, but are you gonna show on TV? Okay, now he has to type for 3 hours,
right? Or go to the barking dog complaint for the 7th time that same night.
So it's real stuff, but it picks and chooses for views, which is fine because I think everybody pretty much understands that at this point. The show's been on for so long.
What's a more recent realistic show that maybe you've watched or maybe you've heard of? Is there one called Live PD?
Yeah. It's basically, I don't think I've ever watched it, but I believe it's basically the same thing with the main difference being they have multiple camera crews with different departments, and they almost have almost like anchors. And I think they do it live, and the anchors, like when something's happening, they'll be like, okay, now we're going to go to, I don't know, Phoenix, Arizona PD. They're out on this, so let's check in with them and see what they got going on, and they'll cut to that camera. So I think they have simultaneous camera crews, and they'll kind of jump back and forth between them.
Got it.
So I think sometimes that is a little more realistic, or at least a more accurate representation of a cop's day, because sometimes they'll be like, this unit in such and such department is on a traffic stop. Let's check in with them. And it might just be a normal traffic stop where they might just cut them a ticket and go. Okay. Or sometimes they'll turn into like a foot pursuit or something like that. I haven't really watched it extensively, so it could be a little off from what I understand, though. That's how it works. So it's a little more of an accurate representation, but at the end of the day, it's basically the same thing as cops, camera crew rolling around with actual police officers. Okay. So, but yeah, since being a cop,
any other realistic show? What's the word I'm looking for? Any other shows you want to talk about in that category?
I don't think so. I think those are the two main ones that kind of everybody knows. But yeah, since being a cop, there's nothing wrong with them. But since being a cop, I don't really have any interest in watching it.
Right.
I definitely liked watching it when I knew I wanted to be a cop, but wasn't one yet. So
Okay, by way of summary here, in the shows and in the movies that we discussed, we have several states that were represented. Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Missouri, Louisiana, a ton from California.
Lots.
Massachusetts, New York, and Arizona. So those are the states that were represented in our shows. Can you guess what the most appearances by a police department was?
I think that we know that it's LAPD.
5 times. In 5 different big screen and small screen shows.
Yeah. Of the 6, well, not 6 because we had a couple overlaps. So
Right.
I think 10 of the 10 different shows and movies that we brought up, I think, 5 of them were
5 were LAPD.
Yeah.
Yeah. We had 7 city police departments represented, 3 state police agencies, Massachusetts, Louisiana, and California Highway Patrol.
Yep.
And that was from Fargo, one of the seasons you didn't see.
Which one?
I don't know.
Which department?
California Highway Patrol.
No, that's season 2 of True Detective.
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. 2 county sheriff departments or offices and the feds from Tombstone, U.S. Marshals.
Mm-hmm.
So
And The Departed a little bit.
that's right.
Yep.
The biggest agency represented in our shows was, what do you think?
LAPD.
No, when I say biggest, I don't mean the greatest number that were represented, but the biggest agency itself as far as manpower goes.
I was still going to guess LAPD.
New York, Barney Miller.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Over
they have like 30,000
cops.
Yeah.
California Highway Patrol was the largest state agency with over 11,000 cops, and the Ventura County Sheriff's Office, which I think was from season 2 of True Detective,
That sounds right.
has over 1,300 deputies.
Okay.
Your top small screen show was?
True Detective, season 1, hands
Right.
down.
Yep. Your top big screen show was?
LA Confidential.
Right. For me, it was LA Confidential for the big screen. We
Yep.
tied on that.
Yep.
And Barney Miller for the small screen.
All right.
Where we were in agreement, we had True Detective season 1 and LA Confidential.
Yeah. We definitely covered some real good ones. There's a lot of other ones that like I've never seen and probably never will see
Right.
because I just have no interest in them. Like some of the newer ones, I know there's I want to say it's like an NBC show or something like that called The Rookie. Like I've seen previews for it. Stuff like that. Just no interest at all whatsoever.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we can't speak to it. You know what?
Right.
I'll say it. It looks stupid.
Well, if you're listening right now.
We're talking about the good ones here.
Right.
Yeah.
If you're listening, and thank you again for listening, you might be thinking, well, what about, chime in on our Facebook page.
Yeah, leave us a comment.
Chime in on our Instagram account. We love to hear ones that you think we missed or that you think we should give a listen to.
Yeah.
Maybe
These are just our favorites.
That's right. That's right.
So,
all right, Doug. Well, what do you think? Should we plug our social media again, or?
yeah. You can find us on Facebook. We are the Cop House Podcast there. Twitter and Instagram, we are at Cop House Podcast, and you can find us wherever you listen to podcasts, be that Apple, Spotify, Amazon.
And to our brothers and sisters out there who are pushing a police car around, or you're working an investigative unit, please be careful out there.
Be safe, everybody.